You bought a property and it's done 120% plus growth in a 4-year window and you sold it and banked profit.
I'll be able to have a $3 million acreage property plus another sort of $7.5 million commercial property and roughly cash flow neutral. The entire loan against my dream home is then also tax deductible because it was used for investment purposes.
Christian Gilmour, mate, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for coming all the way from Melbourne this morning to come and tell us about your story. I'm so excited to have you in here because you are one of the few people I know who has done the thing that everyone wants to do, retire from property. By the age of 28, you retired on $80K passive income from your property portfolio. You spent years building it, strategizing. I've had many conversations about you strategizing your property portfolio. But I wanted to get you on here today to basically show the listeners and show people that it's possible. You did it in a 5-year window, unpack your story, unpack how you did it. But more than anything, I want to unpack, you did it at a young age. You know, you started this property investing thing in your early 20s. What are the things that you learned and how did you change as an investor and also a man? How did you change along the way, right? So, man, thanks so much for coming in. Appreciate you coming in.
Good to see you, man. I'd come up to Sydney anytime just to see you.
I've been asking you to come up for years. It's the first time you've come up just for the podcast.
Well, now you got a pretty office, so yeah. I got to see the office.
Man, you've got a beautiful wife at home, Beck. Bro, she's a hard worker. Both of you guys hard workers. You know, Beck has been in her career. She works for a big accounting firm in Melbourne.
Yeah, consulting
firm, right?
And accounting, but yeah, she's on the consulting side.
So you did a law degree, for goodness sakes.
Not law degree. I ended up in the law side, but I actually studied psych and
Very well-educated couple. And you don't pursue the academics route. And for some reason, you get into property. But before all that, tell me what was life like as a young lad growing up in Melbourne? Maybe as you met Beck and you guys are starting to mature into starting to make some decisions.
Yeah, so I mean, it's my whole life, so I can cover as much as you like. But look,
early 20s.
Yeah, look, I basically from the age of about 18, 19, I knew that I wanted to try and do something of a little bit more significance or a little bit different in my 20s. And particularly once Beck and I started dating, I was about 19 when we started dating and things were looking pretty serious. And I started particularly trying to work on myself a lot. And that involves listening to a lot of podcasts and things like that. Probably the main catalyst that led me along this path was I listened to a podcast by Tim Ferriss where they actually talked to a guy who had retired when he was like 28 or 30 years old over in the US. And he basically laid out the maths of how you can actually retire at a young age. And I'd never had anyone explain that before. I thought you just had to build a business and exit or get lucky in the stock market or something like that. And he was actually able to lay it out in a way where the average person could do it if they were just really disciplined with the way that they went about their finances.
Oh, man, isn't that a thing? Just the discipline to stay on the course.
Yeah.
Right? So many people I feel like jump into this property investing thing and they want to change here, they want to change here. Oh, maybe I'll do cash flow deals, maybe I'll do growth assets.
Yeah.
It's like to stay the course and have a strategy, which I admire that you've done.
Yeah,
you know?
100%. I think it's really important. Like my original strategy and what he talked about was just buying index funds. And that was basically it. Like you just treat it like a savings account almost. You just keep putting money in it every single month. You just live off as little as you can, invest as much as you can. And there's literally math that you can look at of if you save a certain percentage of your income and invest it, you can actually predict the number of years it will take you to retire.
Yeah.
To replace your income. And which we can go into if you want, because it somewhat relates to property as well. But what I then just became completely obsessed with investing. Like I just got into everything. And originally it was mainly just looking at index funds, how to save more money, that kind of stuff. But then slowly over time, I started learning a little bit more about property. And at the beginning I was like, nah, everyone in my family always said, stay away from property.
Really?
Just get into shares. Don't do property. No one, particularly my dad, he was a pretty high level management consultant, really switched on business guy. And he was just like, don't, unless it's your own home, just invest in shares.
Isn't that crazy? The boomers hate it, man. The boomers, for whatever reason, they made the most amount of money on property and they all hate it.
Yeah. So just got really obsessed with it. And then I started realizing that even if you just compare the average returns in property versus the average returns in shares, you should be able to outperform shares using property, just average versus average.
Yeah.
And then the idea came to me, which was, well, if I can outperform shares just with average property investing, what if I learned ways to do well above average? And then that's pretty much what I have spent the last 10 years learning is what are these little tips and tricks and little principles that you can apply that enables you to, when you stack them all on top of each other, you are able to often reduce the risk of the type of investing you do, then also increase the returns at the same time. When you combine both of those things, it was incredibly powerful because my original goal when I was 19, 20, after listening to that podcast is I want to try and retire by 28. My goal was 50 to 70 grand a year passive. And
smashed it.
But I knew that even with the sort of index fund investing and all that, projecting out the model of how that was going to look, the best I could try and pull off was maybe 35 years old. So I knew that I had to find a way to speed up the process. And that's where property and this style of property investing.
When was that, right? Like you're talking, you and Beck are locking lips at 18, 19, and now all of a sudden you're delving into the property space. How old are you when you're like, I'm not going to go down the index funds route? Because we had Harley Giddings on the podcast and he had a very similar story. In his mid to late teens, it was all about shares and blah, blah, blah. He's reading The Barefoot Investor, just pumping money into index funds, whatever. And then there was a moment where it was just like, nah, it's property. What was that moment for you?
It's a good question. It was a slow burn. So initially, I came across it from actually listening to Bigger Pockets, which is a huge real estate podcast over in the US. And I saw what people were doing with property over there. And particularly this idea of you buy a property for less than what it's worth, you renovate it, you revalue it, you pull the equity, and then you buy the next one. It's a little bit different over there. It's a little bit easier to scale a portfolio over there, and the cash flow is a lot better. So it's a different dynamic. But I wanted to try and figure out how to bring that strategy over to Australia. And there was basically no one doing it effectively over here. It took me years and years and years of basically listening to every single podcast I could. And researching and everything like that to start to see that there were some professional investors doing a little bit of a similar strategy. And that's what sort of got me.
Okay. So you're searching for a while. It seems like you got a lot of American influence.
Originally.
Tim Ferriss, this other person you're talking about. But and then you're looking at how does that apply to the Australian market? When do you do your first deal? And what were you and Beck doing? Were you guys working full time? Can you ballpark me some incomes?
Yeah. So I was 23 years old and I just saved up my first 70 grand from just spending nothing through uni. Like I was living off, I think at one stage I was living off $6,000 a year. Like I was living at home, but I was living off $6,000 a year, including all my car costs, clothes, eating out, everything. So I just did nothing.
Wow.
But go to the gym.
Real romantic.
Beck loved it. So I was 23, just got a full-time job, making $50,000 a year. And I went to try and use a buyer's agent for the first deal because although I knew a lot of the theory, I had never done it before. So I wanted to use a professional. And the idea of paying their fee was huge to me because that was like 6 months worth of saving for me at the time, just for their fee.
Yeah.
And that didn't go great. The buyer's agent that I engaged with, I didn't click with them at all.
What do you mean you didn't click with them?
They were very high pressure. Very high pressure. I was also a really painful client at the time. Looking back on it, I realized I was a pain in the neck.
What do you mean?
I was so fixated on the tiny little details, like stuff that really in the big picture didn't matter. Like
How tiny is tiny? You know what I mean? Because some people say that some things are tiny, but
I was fixated on things like I wanted a 6% gross rental yield. I didn't want 5.9. I wanted 6. And it had to be above that. And I was looking for the best deal in the world. And I had no understanding at the time that me waiting and waiting and waiting for this like 1 in 1,000 deal was actually costing me so much as the market was growing at the time as well, that I was losing all this money by having to pay more and more for properties.
Yeah.
And anyway, but I lost some trust with that particular BA. And so I was like, you know what, I'm just going to try and do this on my own. I already knew the area I was going to buy in.
Yep.
And I pulled the trigger.
Pull the trigger. What do you buy?
I bought a 3-bed, 1-bathroom house on 604 square meters.
Brick, weatherboard?
Brick.
Yeah.
Real sort of basic, but tidy.
Which area?
Crestmead.
Crestmead.
Queensland.
This is a freaking...
Logan.
Yes.
Yeah.
You said early 2020s special.
Yeah, I went under contract on Christmas Eve 2019. So I settled January 2020.
Cracker. Okay.
Yeah.
How much you pay?
308.
308. 3-bed, 1-bath, brick house, 600 square meters plus. What's it worth now?
I sold it just over 12 months ago for 675.
675.
Never did $1 of work on it.
Nothing.
Yeah.
So what's that? You're a numbers guy. What type of dollar number is that, and what type of percentage returns that?
I think it gone up. The actual property went up. I think it was 120%, and barely cost me any money to hold because at the time I didn't quite get the 6%. I got 5.9 on it. I was pretty mad about that at the time.
Yeah.
And so I mean, I only put in. I remember it was a 52 grand deposit. So what's that? So it's about $367,000 profit with 52 grand. What? And I pulled pretty much all the equity out within. I didn't fully understand at the time how to pull equity and do that well. Mm-hmm. So I didn't pull the full deposit out until about 18 months after holding it.
Man, so you've made well over 350 grand in what, a 4 year?
Yeah.
In 4 years. And you've put the cash on cash return on that is something stupid. You put in 50 grand.
Yeah.
Deposit closing costs, and you're making 300.
It's a 7x.
7x on your
4
cash.
years.
Bro, that's like crypto money. That's like crypto returns.
Yeah, and that's not even taking into account the fact that I pulled equity out.
Yeah.
To then source other deals with it.
Unreal, man. Unreal. And so you buy that 18 months later, what happens then? You said you didn't quite figure it out.
Yeah, at that point I started getting some traction. And I started figuring things a little bit more out on the strategy side. So I pulled equity and ended up buying another property in Crestmead just around the corner. And that one, I did actually use a different BA for it. And it was quite funny because I sort of met with them and they were like, where did you buy? And I'm like, Crestmead. And they're like, which street? This one. They're like, that's a really good spot. And then I realized that was exactly where they were sourcing at the time. So even though it was 18 months later, and that one was a granny deal. So I ended up building a granny flat on that, bought it for 324, spent about 175 grand on a granny flat.
Nice.
On that one, a little bit of a reno.
Yeah. Okay. That's so funny. That's like you've bought something 18 months later, you buy there again.
Yeah.
Did you have any qualms with buying there again? Because so many times people hit us up and they're like, they want to diversify. There's like, oh, you know, I bought in Regional Vic already, or I bought in Darwin already. Can I buy somewhere else? But it's like, I've always thought if a market's running and it's hot, you know, these markets are normally growing for anywhere from 3 to 7 years. You know, on average, they've got a good 5-year growth stint in them. It's had 12 months worth of growth. It's had 18 months worth of growth. Why don't you just jump back in and let it go for another 3 years? Did you ever think that?
Yeah. So I thought about it.
Because it sounds like you're a bit of a analyzer.
You know me. I overanalyze everything. Yeah. So I thought very deeply about that. The conclusion I came to was that when you just look at your portfolio as it stands, then it looks like a lot of concentration risk if you buy your first 2 properties in one area. But I knew that my plan was to own 5, 6 or more properties. So when you look at it within the context of the portfolio that you're building, and if you plan to build it over a relatively short period of time, which I knew that I wanted to do, then it then actually only becomes about 1/3 of your portfolio. And then the concentration risk within that context is actually it's heavily diminished. Yeah. And so I felt comfortable buying there again. And particularly because the way that I go about buying property is I'm trying to buy in the best possible areas I can. Mm-hmm. So unless I'm buying in the area that I think is best in Australia, then it would take a lot to convince me to buy somewhere else purely because of diversification. In some instances, like a diversification 100% needs to be taken into account, 100%. But you don't want to buy an inferior asset in an inferior location just to sprinkle a little bit of diversification in early on.
100% agree, man. And I think what you mentioned before of if you zoom out to the portfolio that you're building, not what you've got right now, the diversification is coming. When that happens with maturity of the portfolio, maturity of you an investor, and also the maturity of the markets, right?
Yeah.
So how many properties are you holding now?
I've sold a lot. At the moment, I've got one $2 million commercial, and I did some investing with a partner, which we bought 9 together. We've sold 4, just got another one under contract. So I've got taking into account my share, I've got another sort of 2 or 3 resi stuff left over.
But throughout, when you're going through acquisition stage, right? How many did you hold to then sell down to then buy the commercial? Because I feel like that's where your cash flow comes from.
I peaked at about 9 properties. Total value was at its peak was about 5 million, but I've done a lot of selling over the last 14 months.
What do you say when the boomers tell you, don't sell? You should always hold. Just buy and hold. What do you say to that?
Oh, that's a long topic. I've got a lot to say on that. So look, the short answer is that you want your money to work for you as hard as you can. And I think the view that you should never sell comes from the assumption that pretty much all investments are roughly equal. So all properties, the idea of property doubles in Australia every 10 years. And when that's an assumption and it's sort of applied to all property across Australia, then if that plays out and that's true and every property just doubles every 10 years, why would you ever sell? Because there's transaction costs. You're just going to put it into another property that's going to get you the same return, but it's just cost you tax and stamp duty and all that kind of stuff.
That's foolish.
Yeah. Oh, maybe I did the wrong thing. But like when you look at it within the broader context of what actually practically plays out, if you invest well, you should be able to buy early within a growth cycle, ride that growth cycle, and then it often plateaus. In some cases, it can actually pull back for a period. And if your goal is to get your money to work as hard for you as possible and invest as efficiently as possible, then often there is actually an opportunity cost created by keeping your borrowing capacity and your capital tied up in a market that's going to underperform or perform average moving forward.
100%. I'm getting you to break it down because I think that people don't quite understand that, right? You've even mentioned casually in this conversation that you bought a property and it's done 120% plus growth in a 4-year window and you sold it and banked profit. Like, I don't even think some people can comprehend that in a 4-year window that people can get 120% return on a property. So can you explain, because I really want the listeners to walk away with this. What was your strategy? You've mentioned granny deals. You've bought a place, in Crestmead. You've also mentioned a commercial asset that you hold. You've mentioned a sell down. Can you just give us what your strategy looked like and how that played out over the last 5 years for you to get to your 80 grand a year passive?
Yeah, it evolved over time as I learned more and more about investing and finance and returns and got a bit more sophisticated. So my original plan was when I bought the first property, I'm just going to buy a property and just see what happens. I'll just hold it forever, right? That was my plan. And then I started learning about the granny flat strategy, and then I went really hard on that. So my first 4 properties were actually all granny flat properties.
Yeah, right.
So even my first one, I found out later on.
Good granny.
Perfect granny site. So I had some principles that I learned at the time that I used to buy that property that I knew it would potentially open up the doors for some stuff. Okay. But it turns out I could do a granny on it. And so that's why I built the granny on the second property. Third and fourth property, I bought everything with the plan of just building 4 or 5 grannies, just retiring off that. But the issue that I found, and particularly as the price of the granny flat builds went up, it went up significantly.
What was it when you started? What was it at the end?
It's about 170. And I think these days it's like 220, 250 to build them. And I realized that it was actually quite an inefficient use of capital. And I realized that whenever you build one, it really can slow down your progression of building the portfolio because you've suddenly got this building loan and a lot of capital's going towards it and high interest rate and that kind of stuff. So it slows down your progress in many ways. And it just clicked with me one day that you also impact the growth of the asset. Like my second property, same area as my first, bought it for all in for about 500, including the granny flat build. Sold it for 882. Still a fantastic outcome.
Yeah.
But the percentage growth was a lot lower.
Yeah.
Because I've added this depreciating dwelling. I haven't added land to the asset. And so I realized just fundamentally, no matter which way I know people that have tried doing rooming houses and
that's
granny
all
flats.
The amount of people that have told me about rooming houses in the last 2 months.
Yeah.
Man, I would at least have $10. Like
it's almost your next deposit.
No, but honestly, the rooming houses is all the rage at the moment. And there's some great stories about some rooming houses. I think I feel like there's every strategy under the sun works in this space, like in property. I've got a mate of mine who's flipping stuff in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, buys a site, strips it, brand new internal fit out. Like he wants to buy the granny's house. And then he just like their old, crap, boom, spruces it, new kitchen, new bathroom, floors, paints, downlights, everything, on-sells it, makes a mil profit, boom, moves on. And he's doing one of those a year. It's repeatable. He knows the market. He can price it. Bang. That's a great strategy for him. But the rooming houses, the grannies, would you do a rooming house right now in the portfolio? Know what you know?
Personally, no, but to give a little bit more nuance to that, I think you can make money doing all of these strategies. And particularly things like development, house flipping, everything like that. There are people out there that make a killing. The challenge with that is it's not very accessible.
Yeah.
It is really hard to become one of those few people that are able to kill it in that. And even then, I've met some of these people that have done really well out of this through an investment partner of mine who knew a absolute killer developer. And when you look at the return on your money in a lot of these, for the level of work and expertise that's required to go in, they're actually getting somewhat similar returns, in some cases less returns than what you and I get on our properties. Jeez. When you actually break it down, like what we do, buying the property is a little bit of work, doing loan docs, and then managing the property. You get the odd tenant issue or whatever, but it is not like having a 2-year development project.
Sure.
I know some guys that have gone into legal battles over big development projects. Like it's
a lot, huh?
So you could definitely do it, but the reason why I've continued with this residential style of investing and now sort of help other people do it as well is I've yet to find a better strategy.
I interrupted you because you were talking about your strategy around how you got to it. You're acquiring a bunch of growth assets that you, at the time, you didn't think were growth assets. You wanted them all to be granny deals. Granny deal, granny deal, granny deal. What changes for you to pivot and be like, because it seems like, to me, you're chasing cash flow off the bat if you're doing all these granny deals.
I wanted a little bit of both. That's why I bought them in the locations I did and the sort of assets that I did. I just wanted to chuck on the granny strategy on top. And I just realized that residential investment is fantastic for growth and building wealth, not efficient for cash flow. Even when you pay them off and everything like that, once again, very inefficient use of capital. You'd be better off pretty much investing in shares, in my opinion, to get that outcome. So that's where I've always actually had a huge interest in commercial property. My first property that I bought, I was actually intending to get a commercial initially. I was going to actually start in that space. But I realized that the way to go is you build wealth through this style of high growth residential investing, build yourself a fantastic portfolio, build yourself some wealth, and then when the time comes, convert that wealth into very cash flow efficient assets.
So you're buying. You said at the peak your property portfolio was 9 properties, right? I want to come back to that in a minute. So you're acquiring properties, buy in the right area, rinse the equity, go again. Buy the right property, rinse, go again. You do that 9 times, yourself and Beck. Then you go through a sell down stage and buy a $2 million commercial asset. Where was that?
Ipswich.
In Ipswich. So you're still in Brizzy. When do you change? When do you like, all right, yep, it's time to sell up and we're going commercial?
It's a good question. So I should caveat it by saying what I have done isn't necessarily the most efficient way to do it.
Yes.
To be honest, I probably made the transition to cash flow too early. But
you should still be building.
I should really still be building. I should still really be focusing on growing my net worth because I'm so young. Like I'm still only 29 years old.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why I started going into commercial, just for transparency, is number one, Beck and I are looking to probably start to have kids in the next year or two. And so I needed to replace her income. And for the last 2 or 3 years, I basically been doing stuff that has not produced an income for me. So I wanted to create a bit of a buffer there.
Nice.
Through passive income. And then the other thing is commercial has fascinated me for many, many years. And I see it playing a really important role in people's portfolios. So I'm actually trying to upskill on commercial to then actually add it as something I can help other people purchase.
Man, I think it's noble what you're doing. Like I think we do all of this stuff, property investing, to give us more options and to have a life that we want, really, right? You can, and so many times at the freaking kids soccer on the weekend, I speak to some dad. He's like, "Oh man, we sold this place here, and we ended up buying our owner-occupied house." And it's like, "Oh, we know that's a wrong decision. We know we should have kept investing, and it's not a good use of our capital." But like, bro, you just bought a family home for yourself. It's a great place, great area. You got a spot for you and your kids for the rest of your life. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes as property investors, we get so hyped about just only investing for the investment numbers. But there's a big lifestyle factor in that. I mean, you and Beck starting a family soon. I think that's probably way more important than investment decisions. But that's just my own, I don't know, like, I've always wanted to invest to have a better life for me and my family. And I think that's the rule. And I see you doing the same thing. I think it's admirable.
100%. Like and I knew that, and this is what I often tell to people when I talk to them about this stuff, is I've spent so much time learning over the last 10 years, putting in the 10,000 hours to learn all the investment stuff. But when it comes to personal finance, I'm good on the finance side and I can explain to you the finance side, but personal finance is personal for a reason. Yes. You need to filter it through your own personal situation. So I'll tell you what's possible, but you need to then filter it through with what you're comfortable with. Yeah. So what you're able to do, because if you're looking at, I think a lot in terms of return on investment, return on equity, return on time, the most efficient use of capital, things like that. That's how I filter a lot of my decisions. But return on your money in a financial sense isn't the only potential return you can get. You can also get lifestyle return. You can get emotional return. You can get memory return. When you think about the most efficient deployment of your capital, it isn't always just an investment return. Sometimes it could be an experience return or lifestyle return. Bro. That's the way I try and think about it more holistically.
You're giving me chills talking about that, because honestly, I think about that a lot of the time. Like, to me, the experience return is massive. For me and the girls to go away and experience something over the Christmas break, what we're planning to do, it's like, what's that worth? Would I pay 10 grand for it? 50 grand for it? What would I pay to have a lifetime memory with these 3 girls? Right? Priceless. It is. And okay, how many of those do I want? Do I want it just to be one time we go away and have an experience? So I admire that about you, man. And that is so big, and it is personal, right? You, like, what type of life do you want? I found in property investing, the deeper you go into it, the more you have to, or the more you get to analyze your life. What life do I want? 80 grand a year passive is possible in a 5-year window. Well, then what can I do? What do I want to do? Do I want 80? Do I want 60? How hard am I willing to push? We've been mates for about 5 years now, a bit over 5 years. I remember early stages, you always be like, bro, you should go harder, you should go harder, you should go harder. And I and I was trying to go as hard as I could, but your energy and then now you're saying like, oh, I'm playing a bit more defensive. I'm trying to position my portfolio to give me cash flow. Things change, life changes. It's unreal, But before we move on, like I appreciate you sharing about your strategy, your portfolio, and why you've even done it, because I think that's important for listeners to hear. What is your plan now, right? Other than the babies.
Other than the babies. At the moment, the main focus is I am obviously trying to build up the business.
Yeah,
that's what's taking up the vast majority of my time at the moment. All the stuff, all of the late nights thinking about how to continue building the portfolio and thinking about how to pull equity here, move to this bank over there. That's all been replaced by how do I best serve people, because that's my focus now.
Nice.
Because fundamentally, I mean, you know me, I don't spend much. I don't need much to be content. So I've realized a couple of years ago at least that my capacity to produce money is greater than my appetite for it.
Yeah.
So now I'm trying to optimize a little bit more for more meaning and more purpose in my work.
Yep.
So how do I best sort of pass on what I know to other people and help them do something similar to what I've done for me and Beck?
Love it.
But in terms of the portfolio, the current plan that I've got, it's not super complicated. I'm just starting to deal with larger dollar amounts now in terms of deposits. So I'm starting to buy primarily large commercial assets, at least for a period of time.
Yep.
I should be able to hit about 100 grand passive by the time I'm 30, I think.
Which is then, 12, 18 months?
It's seven, yeah, well, technically 7 to about, 15 months, roughly, depending on how you measure it. But by the time but before I turn 31, I'd like to hit 100 grand.
Nice.
And at that point, I think there'll be a good enough base of passive income that I'll then start to optimize again for primarily net worth growth.
Yeah.
So I think my favorite asset is still residential property. Yeah. Like the returns I can get in that is just phenomenal, even compared to commercial. There's some advantages that commercial has at scale over residential, but small scale, and when I say small scale, like sort of 5 to 10 million portfolio or less, it's really hard to beat residential.
The growth rate on it is ridiculous.
It's unreal. Like the return you get on your money is phenomenal.
Can you explain that quickly to people when you're talking return on your money? Because you've also worked in the privates, building someone's private wealth. Like what was that, And your understanding around opportunity costs and return on funds you've taught me so much about that.
This might turn into a finance lecture. You need to be careful. I'm not a finance lecturer, but I'll do my best to explain it without putting people to sleep.
Maybe just return on investment. Like let's start with the bare basic simples of buying a 500 grand property, like how much you're putting into the return you're getting.
Yeah. So just for a little bit of context, the way that I started really thinking about this was through working with the family that you just mentioned. So after being a professional buyer's agent for a while there, took 6 months off, went around Europe with Beck, and ended up getting introduced to these guys that are phenomenal business people and investors in their own right. And I got to spend 18 months just investing with them and doing some joint venture stuff. And I learned so much from them. And one thing that they taught me was they view everything through opportunity cost. And so what I mean by that is they know how to make money. So what they actually measure themselves against, what the wealthiest people measure themselves against is what option is going to make me more. So if they don't go with that second option that could have made them more, there's actually an opportunity cost that's been created. Because they can, once you get good enough with money, you can start to afford whatever you want over a period of time.
Yeah.
So it's then about how do you maximize it? And so that you can then put that towards giving or improving your lifestyle or whatever it might be. So having impact, whatever it is that your goal is. And so from working with them, I started understanding that when you put 52 grand into my first property as a deposit, and then I make, 350 or so out of it, people in the property space view that as basically a 7x, right? But unfortunately, the property space is very simplistic. If you learn about how people measure things in business and in, the share market, the bond market, that whole space, they use completely different metrics. So I won't go
Because
into
we're just
really
talking about return on capital. You put 50 in, you get 350 out, 7x.
Yeah, 7x. But you need to take into account that the 52 grand I originally put in were about 50 grand of equity. The year after that was about 100 grand of equity. And then there was after a year, in year 2, the property went up by a certain percentage then. And in that year 2, you shouldn't think about it in terms of, let's just say year 2, it went up by another 100 grand. It's like, man, my 50 grand then went up by another 100. That's another, 2x return on my original investment. Whereas the way sophisticated investors view it is they view it as return on equity, not return on investment. So the 52 grand might have been my original investment, but at the end of the first year, I might have had 100 grand in the property in terms of equity, my original deposit plus a bit of growth. So in the second year, when it went up by 100 grand, it wasn't a 2x return. Yeah. It was actually just a doubling of my equity.
Yep.
And when I started viewing things that way, I realized that strategy is so much more important than people give it credit to. Everyone thinks about, I've got this portfolio and made all this money.
Yeah.
But there's a reason why you often see people, even in our space, they'll often stagnate at around a $3 or so million portfolio, and they struggle to grow it from there. Is because they look at how much they've made. They don't start to think, how do I they're often thinking, how can I most efficiently build that initial portfolio? But they don't think, how can I then efficiently scale it from there?
This is exactly what I wanted to get into. You learning this stuff, right? What is the difference that you know now to what you wish you knew when you started as a property investor?
It's probably 2 things. I wish I knew more about the fundamentals of investing rather than just kind of getting lost in the source of property, right? I mean, it worked out well, but I wish at the beginning, and I wish more people were taught that the essence of investing is all about risk-adjusted return. It is about what is the likely return I'm going to get and how likely am I going to get that return. That is what all investing comes down to. Fundamentally.
Yeah.
And so whether you look at crypto or you look at bonds or you look at shares or you look at whatever it is, property, business, whatever it is, there is no best investment necessarily. Every single asset class has different pros and cons and a different role to play within a broader portfolio. Now, I've been extremely heavy in property because so far, the style of residential property investing and then combining that with commercial, I cannot find a better risk-adjusted return.
Yeah.
Now, as my wealth grows, I'm probably going to start to diversify more into things like shares and things like that, particularly as I have larger and larger cash buffers as my portfolio gets bigger and bigger. I don't want 200, 300, 400 grand sitting around in a bank account earning 3 or 4%. So I look at the overall portfolio and how to minimize risk as well as maximizing return on my entire net worth. Not just one deposit and one property. I want to look at my entire financial situation, understand how can I maximize it moving forward. That's number one. The other one is I really wish I properly understood the idea of opportunity cost, because once you realize that everything is risk-adjusted return, that's the essence of all investing, and that property is just another asset class, then by understanding opportunity cost, you're able to adequately compare different investments. Some people go, bought 2 buy and holds. Now I want to start flipping houses, or now I want to do a bit of crypto, or now a bit of shares. And
you sound like so many people I talk to.
And the reason why they're doing that, I think this is my theory, but they don't understand what each of those investments, what the outcome is that it's going to produce. So they tend to chase the shiny thing rather than finding the thing that's going to get them a fantastic risk-adjusted return, sticking with it as long as they possibly can, and doing it as safely as possible. And then as their portfolio grows and change, it matures to the point where you actually need to start looking at some different asset classes and different strategies. And the best way to compare those two is know what you're going to get if you go into shares, know what you're going to get if you get into property, know what you're going to get if you get into bonds.
Yeah.
And then compare which is which, what those outcomes, and go with the one that's going to produce the best outcome for you in your situation. Because if you go with those others, it's going to create a huge opportunity cost for you in the future.
Yeah. I mean, I love the way that you look at things. Me and you couldn't look at things any more different, right? We couldn't look at things any more different. But I think the one thing that we're aligned on values-wise is building wealth to create a lifestyle that we both want, right? And that's what I love talking to you about and learning these things from you. But I appreciate you sharing that, because that gives a lot of context for people that are maybe stuck in analysis paralysis. I think, if I could have my opinion, when you're looking at risk rate of return, property in the resi capital growth space it wins out so much at the early stages of building your wealth. Like it is the asset base for people in this country to start having levers to pull to generate something. You can't get ahead with your 9-to-5 job. Like if you're just earning a decent income, 120, 150 grand each, you got a 250, 300 grand household income, you jump into the property portfolio, building a property portfolio first, 2, 3, 4, 5 capital growth assets. Now all of a sudden you let those mature. Now all of a sudden you're talking about playing with close to 1.2 to maybe $2 million worth of capital. You got to assess how you deploy that, very different to how you deploy a 200 grand deposit for the first deal and then rip equity out 9 to 12 months later.
100%. Because people in the residential space are restricted by borrowing capacity and their cash flow capacity, meaning like how much property can they actually safely hold. So when you in that scenario you just described, if someone's got $1 million, $1.2 million of capital that they've achieved after tax, after selling part of their portfolio, all their portfolio down, then it doesn't, maybe they started with 3 or 4 properties and now they've got enough capital for what is probably, 10 properties, right? They've got enough cash for that, but they don't have the borrowing capacity or the cash flow capacity to actually buy those 10. Yeah. So if they were to deploy all of that money into the same type of residential properties, they're going to have a huge chunk of lazy equity sitting around in these properties. So they need to think about how do they maximize that? I mean, it's still great. For someone like that, probably they will still buy another 4, 5, 6 properties. Yep. But then what do they do with the leftover $500,000?
Yeah. Man, we've got some great clients at the moment. They literally come to us, local people from the Shire, 2 pilots, and the conversation almost went like, we've paid off our mortgage and we got no kids at the moment, and what do we do with all this cash? It was just like, we paid off our mortgage, like they've got a great place, and they paid off the mortgage and like, but we still got cash piling up, like just lazy equity. It's like the opportunity cost of not deploying that earlier is wild. But I'm saying that to say, like, I feel like there's so many people out there that aren't even thinking about these 2 fundamentals you're talking about: risk adjusted return and opportunity costs. That is like 2 amazing principles. We could talk about this for ages, because if I keep probing you, you're going to keep going deeper into finance. But I want to come back to some, like maybe like a base level. What's your plan now? You kind of mentioned that already. And surely people in your position, you're talking about having the babies, you've already got some passive income, the owner-occupier house. Are you guys renting at the moment? You guys own it? Where do you guys live? Probably the biggest 2 things that I hear when I talk to people is, the biggest 2 goals I have here is, we want to replace income either for the wife so we can have babies and she doesn't have to work anymore, or we want to build a massive growth portfolio, sell down and buy a mad house around here in Cronulla's 3 mil. Those are the 2 most common things. You're in the situation where you've got the cash flow portfolio happening. What are you doing now?
So yeah, we've rent vested this whole time. We've had the opportunity to buy a place to live in multiple times over the years. Especially when I sold down those first 4 properties, the 2 I had in Brisbane, 2 I had in Perth. After tax, at one point we had sort of over $1 million just sitting in a bank account. And I was like, we were living in Mornington in Victoria at the time, and living in a place that we were renting for sort of $650 a week, just a basic house. And just down the street in a spot that I really like, a really nice house, I was like, I could buy that with cash right now if I wanted to. And that was before I'd bought the commercial. And I decided to keep going down the investment route because I feel that if I was to go and buy the house to live in, once again, I know I sound like a broken record, but it would not be the most efficient deployment of capital.
Yeah.
And Beck and I are in a position at the moment where we're not really itching to own the place we live in. We'd love to, but we're still happy to keep optimizing for finances for the time being.
Yeah.
And so we're about to move back to Bayside where we grew up and move into a bit of a nicer rental. Because with rent vesting, the nicer the property is and the more that you pay in rent, the more it actually makes sense to rent the property rather than own it.
Yeah.
And so, but one day, what the goal is at some point when we have a bit of a windfall from the portfolio, is I would love to buy a acreage property down the Mornington Peninsula or something like that. It would probably be 3 to 5 mil or something like that.
Cracker.
And my goal is to buy it with cash at some point. And then pretty much immediately after settlement or soon after settlement, I'll probably take out an 80% LVR loan against it, assuming I can service it. And so let's just say it was a 3 mil property. I take out 2.4 million, if my maths is right, as an equity release loan. And I'm going to then use that 2.4 million probably as a deposit on some commercial property. Because with commercial property, you can get a lease doc loan, meaning you don't need to use your own income to be able to service the loan. So I can take that 2.4 and it should be able to buy about 7.5 million of commercial property just with that. And the commercial property versus the interest rate, it should mean that roughly it will pay for the entire mortgage. Wow. So I'll be able to have the $3 million acreage property plus another sort of 7.5 million of commercial property and roughly cash flow neutral.
Unreal.
And then the entire loan against my own home, my dream home, is then also tax deductible because it was used for investment purposes. So when we're talking about strategy and the importance of strategy, minimizing opportunity cost, maximizing the efficient use of capital, for me, that outcome sounds a lot nicer to me rather than buying, a little bit more of still a nice property I'd love to live in. Now I prefer to still just rent and produce that outcome down the line.
I can hear people saying, "Oh, but you got to pay tax on that money for the sell down, and look, you've got so much debt. Oh, look, you've got a family and you've got all that debt. Like, aren't you going to be stressed?"
Yeah, 100%. I wouldn't recommend everyone do that. I'm fortunate enough that I've been doing this for a while now, and I've learned enough that I know how to adequately manage that amount of debt and that size of a portfolio. And to be honest, like the short answer is, if you have enough cash sitting in a bank account or in some sort of liquid asset that you can access at any time, you can hold a lot of property and hold a lot of debt. Because I say to people, because I was chatting to a guy the other day who, I won't give all of his specific details, but he's worth a lot of money and he doesn't know how to invest. And he's very, very risk adverse and very adverse to the idea of using debt. And what I said to him was, I actually don't like debt. I've never had a credit card. I've never taken out any kind of personal loan, anything like that. The only debt I've ever had was HEX and mortgages against property.
Yeah.
So even though I've done what I've done, I'm actually quite risk adverse. Hence why I've mentioned risk and risk management so much on this episode. I think about it a lot, but I said to him, because he was just planning the idea of just taking a little bit of equity out of his Sydney home and using it to buy a pretty cheap investment property and just doing one of them just to sort of dip his toe in the water. And he said, yeah, but it's a lot of debt. I don't know if I'm really that comfortable with it. I just said, if you had a big enough cash buffer, let's just say you had a $200,000 cash buffer or a $500,000 cash buffer, how comfortable do you think you would be in holding that property? And he said, yeah, probably a lot more comfortable. I said, the more cash you hold in proportion, you don't want it to have too much cash that it's then starts to impact your overall position. But you want enough risk-adjusted return.
Man, I'm learning here.
But you want probably a little bit more, particularly once you've got an established portfolio and a good net worth, you probably want a little bit more cash than what feels comfortable.
Yeah.
Just because you want enough to account for situations that might pop up, but you also want to account for a little bit more of things that you might not see coming.
And when I'm always talking to, like, let's say young upstarts or young families, and they're like, what is that cash buffer? I always say 3 to 6 months worth of pure living costs. If you're just living the way you want to live, you're getting Uber Eats, you're going to Mimi's, you're doing whatever you want to do, and what does that cost per month? Okay, that costs 15 grand a month. 15 grand a month times 3 or times 6. That is your, like, if you've got that cash buffer, you're always operating out of a place of, do I love this? Yes, I do. Great, I'm going to do it. Like, do I love building a property portfolio for my family to have better options in my future? Yes, great, but that's what I'm going to do. I try to encourage people to never make a decision out of, I'm afraid that this is going to happen. Like, I'm afraid that this, so I'm going to do this. And like, you're operating out of scarcity, and then that's like bad. That from what I see. What do you think?
Got a slightly different take.
Oh,
So
challenging
the way, the way that I think about it and the way I handle my own finances is I split all of these things up. So I split my personal finances from the investment portfolio, and I then also split it from the business, but let's just focus on investment and personal for now. And what I'll think to myself is, on the personal side, what am I actually trying to protect against? So for me and Beck, while we were building the portfolio, there was a couple of times where we pretty much used all of the capital, like all of our cash in our bank account to buy a property, which I know you did. And we were okay with that because we were pretty much living off, at the time, we were pretty much living just off Beck's income, and I had the higher income.
Yeah.
So even if one of us lost our job, we would still be able to live. And we also, if we didn't lose our jobs, because our jobs were very secure actually at the time, we had enough cash flow coming in just from our income that we could fix a vast majority of problems. So earlier on, we didn't really need that much of a cash buffer.
Yeah.
But then once the portfolio got to a certain size, that it sort of became proportionately big.
You need cash buffers.
We needed more cash buffers. But so just to come back to the idea of splitting the two.
Yes.
Was I just knew at the time that we maybe only needed about 3 months of personal expenses, probably even less than that, because I knew that we could survive off one income.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas on the investment side, I was thinking, I actually modeled all of this out. And I encourage people to actually stress test their portfolio on a model and learn how to do it, which is what happens if I have a vacancy? What happens if one of my properties has, like, a flood happen or some freak event happen, and it can't be rented out for a period of time, and it takes a while for the insurance to kick in? Or what if I have a roof that needs to be replaced? And I thought about all this kind of stuff and worked out roughly how much they cost. And this is one beautiful thing about building a larger portfolio, is you're actually more diversified. So if one tenant stops paying their rent, it's actually only like 1/5 or 1/6 of your portfolio rather than your entire portfolio.
Yeah.
So I just worked out what it was I was actually trying to protect against. I would put it in a spreadsheet and work out how much it actually costs to be able to weather that storm.
Is that a per year thing, or is that just like overall?
I was just, the way I thought about it, it's like, for example, I thought, well, if I had to replace a roof, it's probably going to be 15, 20 grand for one of my properties. So I'd probably want at least roughly 10, 15 grand or so somewhere at some time, right? If one of my properties has that.
But you've got, let's say, 5 properties in the portfolio. Do you have 50 grand, one roof each?
Well, not necessarily. So, but what I started looking at was probably want a little bit for if some bigger ticket item came up. But even with a roof, I was like, I knew I could wait 3 or 4 or 5 months. So I really had to sort of drag it out until I had to do the roof. Because usually a roof doesn't just suddenly collapse in on you, if it's suddenly bad. It takes a while for it to deteriorate. More so what I was trying to protect against was interest rate rises. Because if interest rates rise, not only does it increase the negative cash flow of your portfolio, but it actually reduces your borrowing capacity. So when it reduces your borrowing capacity, then you can actually get to the point where you're tapped out. Whereas previously, let's just say you've got 4 properties. This is what happened to me. I had 4 properties at the time. I left my full-time employment, took 6 months off, went around Europe, became a full-time investor. I wasn't earning an income during this time. So I had just under 1.5 million in debt against these 4 properties. And then interest rates went up 12 times, 13 times during this period. So I modeled all this out and I went, okay, what happens if interest rates get to 8%, 9%, 10%, 11%? And I looked at how much that was going to impact the what my negative cash flow was going to be. But the other thing I took into account was all of my loans at the time were interest only. And they eventually tick over to principal and interest.
Yeah.
So I wasn't just assessing interest only cost. I was assessing, what if I'm stuck, I can't refinance, and I then have to start paying principal and interest at those higher rates. And so I actually worked out how much that cost. And I wanted to be able to run for at least sort of 9 to 12 months, because if things got really bad, I developed a plan of, okay, I'll just sell one property, pocket this much capital, I'll have this much cash after tax.
New buffer, happy days.
Add more to the buffer. So I had a plan to tackle it. Now that was an extreme situation. 1.5 million debt, 25 years old, one income. Like, it was a bit of an extreme one, but we got through, because before I left my role, I was just about to buy two more deals. And that didn't happen. And so I had like 180 grand just sitting in a bank account that I pulled against the portfolio and against my own savings. So that 180 grand made us through, 2-3 years.
Unreal.
Of just holding costs, lifestyle, all that stuff.
Man, the way that how deep you think is on another level. But what I'm going to summarize from it is you compartmentalize personal funds, investment funds, and you have buffer for your personal life, and you have a buffer for your portfolio, and you have a buffer for your business.
Correct.
Right? I like that. Last piece of the puzzle, it's kind of touching back to the piece before with the owner occ, right? I find that in this day and age, I'll speak for guys in their 30s, there is this immense amount of pressure to have the house, for one, and to be able to provide a big enough income to fund a lot. Car, holidays, really labels, like all of this stuff. How do you and Beck stay out of that to keep staying the course? Because you guys have stayed the course really strong for the last few years. A long time, like 6-7 years.
We understand what the ramification would be if we sort of succumbed to it. Like if we fell for the trap and started trying to keep up with the Joneses. We know that once you start increasing your lifestyle, it's really hard to then reduce it. It's much harder to reduce it. And we also understand, particularly with the sort of investing that we're able to do, we understand the sort of return that can get over time. And it sounds so boring, but we still think in terms of opportunity cost. If we buy this car, that means that's X amount less that's going towards investing. And we really don't need it right now. And I think, and this is why I like talking a lot about the finance side of things, risk-adjusted return, opportunity cost, is because if people really understood what it was costing them, I think it'll be a lot easier for them to say no to the car or no to the house.
Yeah.
And like I've got a good mate of mine that I was chatting to the other day, and he's got an 18-year-old son. And I've had a couple of chats with him about, man, if you get into investing now, you have no idea how big of an impact it's going to have. I was chatting to his dad a little bit about his situation, how to sort of motivate his 18-year-old son into this. Because I helped him, they sort of split a first property together. So he is getting into the property market that I sourced for them. And I said to his dad, I pulled up a compound interest calculator, and I said, because he's really into cars, so he's spending money on cars. And I said, he doesn't understand that $1 now is not worth $1. And I said, just at 10% return per year, from the age of 65, $1 to him at 18 years old would actually be about $108 at 65. So $1 to him now is actually like him spending $108.
Yeah.
And I said, and that's just at a 10% return. As soon as you change it to a 12% return, it went from $108 to $278. And when I showed that to him, he's just like, I need to get on him about saving money. Like, this is crazy. But there's two ways to look at that. It's, you don't want to fall in the trap also of just investing and that's all you ever do. Like
that was
you
going to
said,
be my follow-up. Yeah.
Lifestyle is so important. You need to balance the personal and the finance. But for him, he lives at home, expenses are low, earning decent income, saving a lot of his money. If he just invested a small amount at the beginning, he would hit retirement so much faster.
That's why I wanted to get you on here, man, because I honestly started investing at the age of 29. You're 29 now, right? And you're talking about having $100,000 passive by the time I've done my second deal, in your life. And I met you like 6 years ago, And so I look at what you're doing. I was like, man, I wish I did that. And why didn't I? I kind of knew, but I just couldn't see the path. It was honestly as simple as that. I couldn't see the path to get there. You toiled and you researched and you listened to stuff from the US and try to find people and read. Like that's what I admire about you, that you could kind of see a path, but then you really try to light it up so your steps became clear. I waited, I feel like, too long, and I feel like I've done okay. And I'm like, man, you started so young. Like, it's incredible. Harley Giddings was on here recently, and he also started so young. And I'm like, you guys, when you're in your late 30s like me, are going to be monsters when it comes to your understanding about property, because you guys are going to be dealing with way more capital and what you can do. But man, I could talk to you for hours. And every time we catch up, it seems like we're on the phone or talking for so long. But tell me, your Gilmour Advocacy, your buyer's agency, what are you doing? What's something that you could tell us that you want to let us know before we wrap the episode?
Look, fundamentally, all I do now is do exactly what I've done for me and back, just for other people.
Yeah.
So that's in essence what the business is. I help on the strategy side. I source only properties that I'd personally buy myself. Same strategy, just helping other people do it and suiting it to their specific situation.
Unreal, mate. Your level of detail and your level of strategy is superior, to a lot of people I've met. But bro, thank you so much for coming on here. I'm looking forward for us to go out for dinner and stuff tonight. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Chase.
Thanks so much for listening to the Moves to Momentum podcast. If you got any value out of this episode, please give us a like or subscribe. Or if you think this is relevant to any one of your friends or family, please flick it to them so they can have a listen.